Hi, I'm Chris Colvin, and welcome to the IvyLife Quad. We meet every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and we sometimes we have a traditional networking event around the table or around the screen if it's online. But we also have guest speakers, and I'm delighted today that we have Susan Ganz, who's going to be talking about leading through crisis, which I think is a super important topic for all of us these days. And Susan, if you don't mind, just tell the group a little bit about your work and a little bit about how you came to this topic.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me today, and also want to thank all of you for participating. So professionally, I am a strategic advisor and business strategist with my own firm called Ganz Strategic Solutions. And I come at this from corporate experience in business consulting and finance. And I also come at this from a human behavior point of view. And this topic of leading in crisis came to me at the beginning of the pandemic when I could make a decision around, well, how was I going to show up in this crisis? And I consciously decided that it was going to be about showing people the way and how to connect virtually and being a resource. And so that led me to sort of coaching and mentoring of a number of organizations about how to switch to being in a virtual world, and also led to me launching a web show, which I had the pleasure of interviewing Mick the other day for, which is called Resiliency and Empowerment Seminar Today, which is about focusing on small business owners and nonprofits and the way that they're handling being resilient and empowering others, as well as highlighting their causes. So this is a way of showing leadership through crisis. So I'll dive into the material.
Great. Let me just share the screen. And while I'm getting that set up, I just want to say I love it when Ivy Lifers collaborate like that. So that's just music to my ears. So I'm glad you guys had a chance to work together.
Yes. So you can go to the first slide, Chris. Thank
Okay.
you.
Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, great. So you want me to advance?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Perfect. So, oops, what just
Did I go
happened?
too far?
Yes, we're black screen now.
Black screen now?
That's what it looked like. You blacked out the screen for some reason.
Hmm.
Hopefully it's
Usually
on
this
your.
works. Are you seeing it now?
My whole screen went dark and I don't know why. I don't know
Here.
if it's on my end or your
Do
end.
other folks want to pop in the chat window? Can you see the presentation?
We can see your screen.
Okay, so other people see it.
Okay. I don't know what just happened, but the screen went black on my ends.
Okay, possibly just went to sleep or something?
Possibly, I don't know. It was very strange, but that's, we lead through crisis.
Yes, this is a good example.
So you might be wondering, why are we starting a leadership conversation with mindset and self-care? And the reason being is the power of the mind. The research has shown that having a positive and a growth mindset contributes to success in life. So that's some research that Carol Dweck has done on mindset. She's out of Stanford. You might have read some of her findings in her books. And remember that you are truly what you focus on, and it influences not only you, but it influences how you show up and impact others. So positive mindset and self-care really equal being grounded. It's like your foundation. So if you think of building a house, right, you wouldn't put the roof on first. It's about getting your foundation solid. And so it's hard to like reimagine and pivot and redirect energies when you're in a place of fear and negativity. And I think what the pandemic has reminded us about is about being grateful for everything that we have, including our health. And I think in the past that we've been taking things for granted. So I think in this time it's about, having that positivity and gratitude for all that we do have. So I'd like to hear from you in the chat box. Why do you think self-care is so important?
And Susan, are you now seeing the chat box, or are you going to rely on
Yes.
me? Okay,
No,
good.
I'm seeing the chat box. So why do you think self-care? Okay, so from Victor, it's the foundation for everything else. Yes. Scott says, so you can regulate emotions. Okay. Absolutely. Karen says, you cannot accomplish anything if you are unwell. And the self-care is about being fully present for not only yourself, but it's about being fully present for your family, for your clients, for your employees, for your vendors, for your community, all the people that you interact with. That's why being present and taking care of yourself is so important. And yes, and Victor said, it's like you put your mask on first. Yes, then your children. And if those basic human needs are not met, everything else is almost impossible. From Chris. Yes. Yes. And I've also seen the consequences of when you don't take care of yourself with some of the CEOs that I've worked with. So one of them said to me, it took exhaustion of landing in the hospital multiple times for her to get the message that self-care is so important. So now she has accountability buddies. She puts it in her calendar about eating and drinking water, and uses that. I have another CEO who really understands the importance of self-care and has his routines in the morning of getting up early and exercising and reading and meditating and gratitude journal, things of that nature, although he's had to modify his exercise routine during the pandemic because the gym is not available. Another CEO has this routine of reflecting on her day in the evening and sort of washing all the challenges and things she takes on from her clients during the day. That's like a nightly ritual for her. So let me go over some strategies, and then I'd love to hear from you all in the chat. Like, what are some of your strategies and the practices that work for you relative to self-care? So I'll give you some time to think about that while I go over some of the strategies. So I mentioned morning and nightly routines. Personally, I try to follow in the morning from Hal Elrod, the Miracle Morning. And he has a 6-step process for that. So you start your day with, he calls it silence. I do deep breathing, affirmations, so positive things you feed your mind with. V is for visualization, E is for exercise, R is for reading, and S is from scribing or journaling. And I personally journal about some things I'm grateful for, some things I'm proud of, and the results that I want to achieve for that day. So it helps me to focus. And then at night, I map out my day for the next day so that I gear myself up for the following day. Breathing, deep breathing, I find it's calming and slows things down so you can focus. On feeding the mind, you have lots of choices about how you want to do that, what you consume relative to news and TV and movies and learning and activities that you do in terms of connection through IvyLife. Feeding your body, being aware of what you're eating, and drinking water, what type of exercise you want to get. I know it's hard when you're sitting in front of a computer screen all day. What can you do in terms of standing up or even stretching your legs while you're on calls? I was on a webinar last week where I was moderating, and one of our speakers talked about sitting being the new smoking because we're not getting around and circulating. So I encourage you at least every hour, get up for even 5 minutes and walk around, even if it's in your home office or up and down stairs, to get that exercise. Sleep, try to have at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I know that's hard sometimes, but it's really, your sleep is so important to your focus and your well-being. And then having some structure to your day. In this pandemic, I've tried to carve out time for when my working hours are, when there are breaks, when I spend time with family. And it's not perfect every day, but it's a structure that I can at least rely on to try to incorporate work and family and other things. So I so appreciate you all sharing in the chat. So we have some breathing suggestions from Scott about 6 breaths in and out, and to limit news consumption. That's his best practices. Chris has replaced phone calls with video calls to simulate more of his every day. Jeff, it says, now it seems curious when someone wants to do phone and not video as a break perhaps from video. Rajan saying, agree with breathing to slow the mind. Mediterranean diet, like in the wine part, Chris. Sally, listening to music and dancing. Consuming info not just about COVID and the current situation, trying to focus on more normal things like being forward focused. And Mick likes the miracle morning as well. Awesome. So next slide. Mick, did you raise your hand? Did you want to share something? Yes. Okay.
I did, yes, because you're in my wheelhouse. So I love what you're talking about right now. This is part of what you discussed, is what I shared last week when I did our health presentation. I just wanted to share with everyone, if you're looking for, and I love that Susan mentioned the journaling in the morning. She mentioned something by Hal Elrod. It's called, he calls it the Savers. They stand for the things that she mentioned, but the book is called The Miracle Morning. It's a really great book. It's short. It won't take you very long to get through it, but it gives you a great structure for how to start your day or even end your day. But I actually love this journal by Mel Robbins. It's called the 5-Second Journal. So if anyone needs just a way to get into the proper mindset for your day, it gives you just a couple of quick prompts to start your day, starting with, how do you feel this morning? And then based on how you're feeling, it prompts you to think about, okay, well, how can you feel more energized? What are the things you can do? So it's always attempting to help you get to the next level of feeling good in your day so that you can be your best, and then all of the things you're trying to accomplish, right? Which is getting through the crisis mode. So anyway, I love that. Thank you, Susan. That was awesome.
You're welcome. So now let's get into, well, what are some pitfalls to avoid when you're leading? And I think the first one is to ignore that we are all humans and we have emotions. I think sometimes we could get so focused on sort of tactics and operations and focused on making money and metrics and results that we forget that no matter what business we're in, even if we're in manufacturing or service business, there are human beings that are running your business, that are your clients, and that in a recent seminar, somebody said, we're not human doings, we're human beings. And for better or for worse, we come with those emotions. And it's important to acknowledge them and to recognize that each of us are on our own journeys relative to their crisis. So somebody said recently, we're all in the same storm, but you might be in different boats. And to me, that means that where it might be in different mindsets and different circumstances in terms of resources that we have. So just to be mindful of that. And I'll show you in a moment the stages that people potentially can be in during this crisis from a mental point of view. So I would advocate for having compassion and empathy and patience during this time. And I see that some participants have raised their hand. Scott, did you want to share something?
Yes, thank you, Susan. Just a quick point. I was on a conference call yesterday, actually a Zoom meeting, excuse me, yesterday with a bunch of executive coaches, and one of them mentioned for leaders the importance of them checking in with their people, not just checking up, right? So it's that more emotional connection, that human connection, rather than just, reaching out to them to check up on whether the work or the task is completed.
Excellent point. As people want to really be heard these days, it's the human need for connection. So when you ask them, well, before we get into the agenda, how are you doing? No, really, how are you doing? How is the family? How are you handling this? So taking that extra minute or so just to do that, I think is so important. And when you're in that fear and panic mode, that's when you, as I mentioned before, you can't access the logical thinking and the creativity, because your body changes when you're stressed and your heart beats faster. Your senses start to get dulled, and you can't access your creative thinking, and you can't access logic. So the sort of phrase paralyzed by fear, that's what kicks in. That's why, because there's this physiological reaction that kicks in. So be mindful of that. I think another thing that I've seen people do is they just go and hide. They go dark. And this is not a time to go dark. This is actually a time to be very visible with your clients, with your employees, right? Because you think about that engagement, like what's the cost of losing an employee? What's the cost of losing a client? And it's about communicating and being in touch. Some organizations early on said, well, I guess we're not going to do events for a while. And I said, no. You're going to do events. They're just going to look a little differently going forward. They're going to be online. And I can show you how to do that. And I know it's uncomfortable, but I can show you the way. And, initially people are resistant to change. And I think that's why this pandemic is so hard, because there's a lot of change and a lot of change fast. But I think that by knowing you don't have to go it alone, which is another point I mentioned, and having a community to walk you, that's what really helps. So I really want to hear from you all in the chat box. What are you doing to keep engaged with your employees and your clients? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I think it's also important to hear, to know that you don't have to wait until the message is right and perfect. Through 2 different schools that I'm alums of, I saw presidents that had very different reactions. One president was sort of raw and real. A couple of days after the pandemic hit, she very authentically said, look, I know this is hard, and we're going to do something for the seniors, especially we recognize all the efforts they put in the 4 years. So no matter what we do, whether it's virtual or in person, we're going to mark that day. And if we can't be in person at a later date, we'll figure it out. And then even a couple of days after that, she reiterated the message, and it was very heartfelt. I had another situation where president of another university came out and said, sorry, we're not having in-person graduation. So what are your thoughts on virtual? And there was such an overwhelming response because there was some being out of touch with how important and acknowledging the 4 years of effort to get the college degree. I said, okay, I got it. I hear you. We're going to do something when we can in person. In the meantime, this is what we're going to do virtually. So I think being raw and real is okay. I think reaching out and seeking feedback is very important. So from the chat, I hear doing events online, a lot of webinars, sending updates and info to current and past patients. Awesome. Trying to share with clients articles about their industry, not just about COVID. That's Chris. Scott says, reaching out to clients to check in, see how they're doing, whether there's anything I can do for them, and send them helpful resources and articles. Awesome. Then he had to go. Dale saying, move most meetings to Zoom. COVID humor WhatsApp stream to make people laugh a little bit. As a teacher, get flooded with emails from students, and now that the semester's open, just it's okay to disengage too, Michelle. Letting clients know how regularly adjusting their service to meet their circumstances and offering different options if they want something different now. So that's great, being very creative and letting the community know, hey, I've got some different things now, let's talk. Looking forward to our virtual reunion. The solitude time that Karen has. Awesome. Last couple of points before we move on to the next is to remember that there's a bigger picture out there. And I think being grounded in your goals and values are very important. And I think, again, sometimes we get into the trap of focusing in on operations that sometimes we lose sight of that bigger picture. And now I've seen organizations starting to position themselves for the future and started to plan for what that looks like. And the point of don't go it alone, don't alienate your employees and clients, bring them into the fold. And we've heard some ideas about how people are doing that. In fact, my husband's firm had a meeting the other day where they asked the employees about what they're concerned about in terms of getting prepared to go back to the office setting when that's allowed. And he works in a big office building in New York City. And, you know, one of the things that was brought up was, well, we don't want to wait an hour to get up to our floor in the elevator. So what is that process going to look like? So all those practical things being discussed. But I'd also say, in terms of not going it alone, you know, use this community, the IvyLife community, to connect and get ideas. There's chambers of commerce, other professional organizations and alumni organizations. There's SCORE, there's small business development centers, and importantly, all the personal boards of directors folks that you can make as part of your support system. I also want to hear from you in the chat box what you're doing to prepare for the future. I know of one law firm that's already ordered PPE for their employees and have cleaning supplies and plexiglass all ready to go. Give you a minute to type in the chat box. Okay, so Karen's adding some content for free for grandparents to use in crises. Dale says involving staff and addressing the challenges, asking how they feel, what they want, and listening to their suggestions. Excellent. Vic doing, continuing to do online health education. Chris working with general counsel, bring more innovation into legal departments. Awesome, lots of things flooding in. Offering free mediation. Let's see. Thinking about new ways to do online instruction to make it engaging and fun. People working for home for a long time, yes. So relaunching internet connectivity product, awesome. Looking to deliver new and creative ways to deliver services. Continuing to network during and post-pandemic. Having a discussion group where we share information about reopening. And I love this from Dale, applying the lessons learned during this time, not trying to go back to exactly how we were, because things have been different and will be different for a long time. So let's go to the next slide, Chris. So I wanted to bring to your awareness about something I mentioned a few minutes ago, which is, where are people in their journey with the pandemic, and how are they kind of showing up during this time? And people could go through this continuum sort of in a linear fashion, or they can actually go back and forth between the stages. So the first stage, or one of the stages, is fear, where people might feel that they're mad and they're complaining and they're hoarding supplies, and you've seen those people at the grocery store. Then they may move into what's called the learning zone. And this is not from me. I borrowed this graphic from another source, where people are starting to accept their emotions, and starting to give up what they can't control, and starting to evaluate the information that they're receiving. And then they might move into the growth zone, where they're starting to be more empathic and thinking of others, and making their talents available for others, and having appreciation and empathy. So, think about where you are personally at in this journey, and think about your clients and your employees, and identify where they are in their journey and meet them where they're at. Because not everybody's going to be in the same place, and know that you're not coming from the same place they are. So I think this can be a tool just to help you in your interactions with your employees and your clients, your family, and your community at large. So Chris, we can go on to the next slide. Okay. To sum up, here are the best practices. So as I mentioned earlier, is to really just show up and be visible. And people are looking to leaders right now, because there are the needs, acknowledging the human needs of certainty and connection. And the way you can provide certainty and connection as a leader is to provide direction and guidance and structure. And by providing forums to connect, you're providing that opportunity, that outreach opportunity. And as I said, be authentic. I love watching the newscasters in their homes. I love watching Jimmy Fallon do the Tonight Show from home. It's not perfect. And I think last night when I was watching, he was like in a new part of his house and the dog was interfering, and it was all okay because it's real. And, and people, I think, favorably react to that. Like, okay, it's more relatable. You're not a robot. Over communicate during this time to really check, see how your clients are, how your employees are, how is your family doing, what's going on with your community, and just to know to be there. And I think flexibility is a new part of our vocabulary, because we've had to make changes very quickly to perhaps how we've been doing things, and to be patient with technology glitches, as we saw earlier. It's all good. Do your best to stay positive and in that more of a growth mindset, so that you can influence others and impact others and radiate that positive energy to others. To be resourceful, use that creativity to find new services, new ways to connect with people and be of service. I have a typo here, it's okay. Seek opportunities for collaboration, collaborate with people who serve a similar client base, but come at it from different perspectives. And I think this community is a wonderful community to do that with. And also to seek out your support system. Again, I think Ivy Life's another way of building your support system too. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat box about any best practices and tips that you would like to share that's working for you and your organization. So some people have said, been able to support friends' efforts by buying books and introducing people. It's from Sally. Karen says, just a word of caution about over communicating when it's non-substantive, sometimes can be disruptive. To start each day with the Elrod Savers from Nick. Gratitude's been really helpful for her. Chris, finding access executives that might not have normally been accessible because they save times on their commutes and interested in hearing some new leadership ideas. Awesome. Chris, if you could go on to my last slide, just my contact information, and then we can open it up for a more broad discussion. So here are ways you can contact me: email, phone, my website, LinkedIn. Happy to connect. Happy to be a resource for you. If you'd like to be considered as a guest for my show, we can talk about that too. And I'd love to hear from you about what you're taking away from this discussion today, just so that we can ground the lessons for everybody.
So Susan, just let me know when you want me to stop the share.
Yes,
Okay.
You can stop the share. And Chris, are you gonna email the presentation out, or
Probably what I'll do is I will both post it to the IvyLife website at my first opportunity. I hope to get to it over the weekend. It's unlikely today and tomorrow because I have a lot on my
it's
plate.
fine.
And then what I'll try to do is send a dedicated email out next week linking to some of the, both yours and Mick's. That way people can find it more easily. So, but I'll send you the link as soon as I post it, so you could share it on LinkedIn or whatever you want to do with it. Okay.
Yes.
It'll be on YouTube too, so you could also directly access the YouTube video.
Yeah.
Good. So I want to say, first of all, excellent presentation. We still have about, up to 15 minutes for Q&A, but I thought that was fantastic, Susan, both the substance of it and also I love the way you handled it. You were very calm. I liked your use of the chat window, because sometimes the chat window can be a bit of a distraction, but the way you used it was, I just thought, very resourceful to sort of take questions during with chat, but then open it up after to an out loud discussion. Just a really nice, you handled it very well. So
thank you. Thank you.
And then I think we're opening it up to questions. So just unmute yourself if anybody has a question for Susan.
So I think Karen had a question about how to bridge communication style gaps between boomers and millennials and Gen X during this time of more than ever electronic communication. So I think it's about asking people what their preferred method of communication is. It was a practice that we talked about even pre-pandemic is, what is the best way that people want to receive information? Sometimes people it's text, sometimes it's WhatsApp, sometimes it's phone, sometimes it's video. So I think a way of bridging the gap is to ask.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, there was a question that I think it's up in the scroll a little bit, but Dale asked, where can we find your show, Susan? I don't know.
Yes. So you can find it two ways. So if you go to GansStrategicSolutions.com, you'll see under news and insights, you can see some of the interviews that have been recorded. You can also go to my YouTube channel, which is also Ganz Strategic Solutions, and I've posted some of the interviews there, and I will be posting more.
Great. Victor asked something, but I'm not sure I know the context. He says, Susan, do you have any examples of people doing this well and or poorly? But I don't know what this is. So maybe, Victor, if you're still there, maybe you can ask. I don't know if this, I guess Victor asked the question and then disappeared. Oh, no, there he is. Okay. Do you want to clarify, Victor? You're muted.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. So just in terms of all the sort of the practices, especially in terms of communicating with employees, because you hear all in the news, you see what's happening at sort of a top level, companies shutting down and so on. But have you come across examples of companies that are leading well during the crisis, or companies that are leading particularly poorly during the crisis as cautionary tales?
So I think what I've seen, some of the companies that I look as model examples are the ones that have very early on and regularly have been communicating with their clients. I mean, I think there's some companies and nonprofits that sort of have waited to communicate to get it perfect, or just come out. Like I received a solicitation the other day on from one organization for Giving Tuesday, and it was sort of like out of character because from this particular person, he was soliciting me, but I hadn't heard from him since the end of January. And it's like, now you're reaching out for me to give money? Where have you been? And I know broadly his university has been doing some virtual conversations, a series, but there was a disconnect in that communication. So I think it's about, you have to think about your branding and who you want to be and how you want to show up. And that came off as, well, I just want something from you. I'm not giving. So I
think, which is ironic on Giving Tuesday.
Right. So I think it's about, think about a mentality of serving, right? So if you're truly serving, what does that mean? And how are you showing up? And I see some of the commercials that focus on like community, and then at the end they'll say who they are. You don't even know who they are, because it's really about giving back. I that resonates with me personally, that sort of branding, that it's recognizing that this is a human condition. One thing that I personally feel like when people say we're all in this together, that is an annoying phrase to me right now, because I think it's so overused and it doesn't have meaning. And I think it like I said, people are in a different stage in their journey and they might not be in the same boat. So you can't say that we're all in the same boat, because we're
Right.
coming at this from different ways.
Yeah.
So that gets a little lost on me personally.
It
So
seems like we're having parallel journeys, but it's not the same journey, right? So
yes.
I like your image of the different boats going down the same river, but in very different boats, some of which are yachts, so as we read in the paper. But I had a question, Susan, if it's okay.
Yes. Yes.
So this is really great strategy and tactics you've given. I'm interested in, how do leaders need to adapt their skills, right? Because a lot of great leaders are famous for how they are in a room, like personally. A lot of the projection of leadership is done, and there's great leaders who really know how to work a crowd. There's other ones who know how to work a room one-on-one. Some are great at
Yes.
both. And a lot of leadership is actually physically showing up and being there in the right places at the right times with clients, with employees, with more junior executives. What are people doing to fill that gap? Because this is a huge skill set. Many of them have spent decades building, and now it's basically unusable. So what are they doing to fill that sort of gap that their physical presence used to bring?
So that's an excellent question, and I think this is where your support system helps, right? If they feel comfortable going to an informal coach or formal coach to work on this skill. I will share that a couple of years ago, I was sort of thrown into the fire of working across the world with colleagues from a global organization called the Female Wave of Change. And I raised my hand to lead some sessions for an initiative called Women Leading in Change. And I was paired with an instructor from Lebanon. And so I couldn't fly to Lebanon every time, right, to work with her. So I've never met my co-teacher in person. We've had to develop this relationship online. And it's about being focused on the other person and finding where you're similar. So I don't know, she's going to accept this woman from New York. How is that going to work? And when I saw her on the other end of the screen and saw that, hey, she's a working mom, she's an entrepreneur, she has a passion like I do about women's leadership. And so that common bond, so I would say in anybody who's trying to connect in this sort of way, it's about finding some commonality, some thematic, some thread that can weave you together. And so I think there's coaching, I think there's finding the commonalities, and I also think there's probably some online classes too about how do you connect and making that emotional connection with people when you can't physically be with them.
That's very helpful. I think we may have time for maybe one more question. I also have an ask related to what you're talking about, Susan, which is I'd love to, if anyone knows a media trainer that would be willing to present one of these Thursdays that would talk about media training for the work from home environment, I think that would be an incredibly useful thing because it'll help us show up in a better way when we're limited to a box. So Jeff, if you know somebody, could you just,
I know somebody too. Yeah.
well, both of you, if you don't mind shooting me an email offline and seeing, as long as they're willing to speak to the group, I would love to have someone like that. Any other show of hands, people, anyone else interested in that topic? Looks like a few. Good. Okay. Oh, quite a few. Okay, great. So I think one more question, maybe two, if they're brief.
So Rajan had a question about some industries have been decimated and many companies may not come back. Any recommendations how leaders in these situations should handle the crisis? Yes, actually. So one of my friends from business school has a business which is all in person. It's a sports league for professionals, all different sports. Professionals meaning professional workers, not professional athletes. And he's had to furlough all of his employees right now, and he's not sure when he can come back, what this looks like at all. And so the way that he is handling this, his word is transparency. So he's personally reached out to each one of his employees to, talk about the furlough, to be there, to sort of humanize the situation and recognize and be fully open to, like, this is what's happening. And I think there's a lesson in there about it being human and being authentic, and recognizing. And then, his next step is going to be, figuring out, well, what else can I be doing with this company and this idea? How can we pivot? And one of the other things he's doing as a leader is he's actually offered to mentor other CEOs during this time. So I think, again, I'll bring it back to IvyLife. I think we can be mentors to each other and advocates for each other, and figuring out the challenges that we're facing, and that's why we have this, right? This is a community.
But thank you for that. Yeah, I'm hoping it's a safe space where people feel free to kind of talk about things they're concerned about and get great advice. We're recording this one, so it's a little different. You may not want to be too vulnerable on something like this, but most weeks we don't record, and that's a time to just be completely open about how you're feeling and what's going on. So I thought this was fantastic. I think we better wrap it up because I'm sure people have meetings at the top of the hour. So Susan, this was absolutely excellent. I really thought you did a fantastic job, and thanks for being a lifetime, IvyLife member. And anyone who's not a member of the community, I think most of you on the call are, but would love to have you join. If you have any questions, you can always find me at chris@inthehouse.org, and hope to see you all next Thursday. If you want to come again at 2 p.m. We're going to do this again, but it'll be a repeat session, but we may have slightly different Q&A. So you're also, of course, welcome to come back at 2 p.m. Eastern. So thanks again, Susan. I'll give you the last word.
Welcome. So I appreciate everybody's participation, and I loved you sharing your best practices and your tips. I would say I'd love to continue the conversation. If anybody wants to continue one-on-one, you find me during LinkedIn or Susan@GansStrategicSolutions.com. And I really encourage all of you, if there's somebody you connect with here, to meet one-on-one, because this is why Chris has created the community, is for people to connect and collaborate.
I definitely couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you, Susan. Okay.
You're
Hope
welcome.
to see you all next week. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.